Hello, folks. Today is Samuel Johnson's birthday. He'd be 312 if he was still with us. And I figured he deserved some sort of a small tribute. I planned one for Noah Webster as well, but his birthday isn't till the middle of next month, October. So, as many of you may know, Samuel Johnson is famous for the 1755 dictionary, which is a hoot. And if you're not familiar with it, check it out. Because it's fascinating. It's filled with quotes from hundreds of different authors, playwrights, satirists, poets, theologians, historians, on and on and on. He uses quotes from famous people in the definitions of his work. Samuel Johnson was actually, he was just a nobody hack writer until he was commissioned to write the dictionary. England decided it needed a dictionary. France had one, Italy had one, and Britain didn't have one. And Samuel Johnson had friends in, well, some influential places. So they chose him to write the dictionary. And they gave him £1,500. But the poor guy had scrofula, which is TB of the lymph glands when he was a kid, and it really scarred him up bad. Now, I won't keep yakking. You can read. But he was an interesting historical character. Now, there's a documentary that BBC made. It's on YouTube. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in watching. Now, Samuel Johnson's family was not rich. His dad was owned a bookstore. He was finally able to go to Oxford after his mother received an inheritance from a cousin that passed away. Left her £40. Now that sounds like a pittance to us today, but in the 1720s, around 1730, that would have been a lot of money. And then Samuel, he married a woman that was, well, she was 20 years older than him at least. They're around there. And had, I think her kids were grown by the time they got married. And some of them really copped an attitude about it. And she had some money, so he decided he was going to try to start a school, and it didn't pan out too well. His quirky behavior put the students and the parents off, and it never worked out. There have been some nice facsimiles produced of Johnson's dictionary in the last several decades. Here's one. It's kind of rare, very rare actually, and published in, of all places, Lebanon in 1978. Now this set right here, this facsimile of Johnson's dictionary was put out by the Folio Society, if you're familiar with them. They make high-end books on the classics generally. And this set of I almost said encyclopedias, dictionaries weighs a little over 28 pounds. That's how they were meant to be as close to the original as possible. And they're very nice. They only produced 1,000 sets, so they're quite rare in themselves. And then Longman Dictionaries of London, of course. They too put out their version, bound in Cabra leather. And it too is high end and very nice, although it's got a very cheap slip case. Now, a Scottish writer by the name of James Boswell wrote a biography about Samuel Johnson, and it's a huge book. It's over 1,000 pages. Now, Samuel Johnson was a patriot, let's say, a conservative. He didn't think much of the American colonies putting up the fit they were putting up at the time. He lived during the time of the American Revolution when it was going on. And he said, "How is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes?" Because there was a young black fellow, well, he was just a kid when he showed up, was an ex-slave from Jamaica that came to live with Samuel Johnson and took care of him in old age. And Johnson left him quite an inheritance, like 750 pounds. Back then, he would have been set for life, 750 pounds. That would have been quite like inheriting $50,000 today or something like that. It was a lot of money, more than that. You see, I tried to put it into perspective of what the amounts, when you hear these amounts back in the 1700s, to try to put it into perspective what it would be worth today. Back in those days, the mid 1700s, if you made £500 a year, you were considered wealthy. You could live on £300 a year, kind of comfortably. Johnson received a pension from King George III later on in life. That's the same king that America was fighting, revolution, so you can understand why Johnson had the leanings he did. You know, he knew where his bread was buttered, so to speak. Now, Johnson left Oxford before he graduated. He ran out of money. And it really bugged him that he never had those letters after his name. But after some, well, teeth pulling and influential friends, he finally got those letters, an honorary degree. They finally broke down and gave it to him. right before the dictionary was published. Now, Browne's Vulgar Errors, also known as the Pseudodoxia Epidemica, was a popular book in its day, in the mid-1600s. It sought to debunk various superstitions that went around at the time. It was kind of like for lack of a better term, a science book, but not really. There's some wacky, kind of off-the-wall stuff in it. It's a shame they haven't rewritten, retypeset that book in modern English instead of those, you know how the old English was back then with the S's that look like F's. So Durham's Physicotheology and Browne's Vulgar Errors are the two books mentioned in the documentary. And I'll put the link in the description if you're interested in checking it out. John Dryden is one of the giants of English literature, famous poet, critic, playwright, etc. Now this fella here I had not heard of until this. He is the oldest that Johnson quotes in the dictionary. Robert Grosseteste, I suppose I'm pronouncing that correctly. Robert of Gloucester, I guess is why they say that instead. But he was what they call a polymath. He was into a little bit of everything, sciences, religion, all kinds of different things. And Johnson even quotes several women in the dictionary. Of course, we know that women didn't really attain to those kind of positions in those days, being writers and playwrights and poets, but some did. Some broke away from the social convention and became quite prolific writers in their own right. This lady here, Charlotte Lennox, is one. And Hester Malsa, I have to admit I had not heard of them until I saw their names in the dictionary and then looked them up. Now, of course, Alexander Pope is quite famous. Now, he died about 2 years before Johnson started working on the dictionary. And he quotes Alexander Pope. He's one of the most quoted in the dictionary. Now, Richard Savage was an acquaintance of Samuel Johnson. He was a party animal. He and Johnson used to party together, sleep out in the street and get into trouble. And of course, this gentleman needs no introduction. I think most folks have heard of him. And of course, Jonathan Swift is another that he quotes. I'm only mentioning the few that are quoted the most in the dictionary. He quotes hundreds. Many of them most folks have never heard of. Of course, Gulliver's Travels is what Jonathan Swift is famous for. And of course, Johnson was a Christian man and a moralist, and he quoted heavily from the Bible as well. And there were a few people he refused to quote in his dictionary, Thomas Hobbes being one. Hobbes was a heathen and he didn't care for it. And Christopher Marlowe, I think he just wasn't that famous at the time, even though he predates Johnson, was more back during Shakespeare's time, wasn't he? He just, I guess he didn't really attain fame until later on. And then Samuel Johnson died in 1784 of a stroke. And like many other uh, famous and great Brits, he's buried in Westminster Abbey. And that is the end. And I hope you wasn't too bored by that. It's kind of interesting. He was an interesting fellow. And if you ever get the chance, if you've not looked at it, I encourage you to check out the famous 1755 dictionary. It's online. I'll leave a link in the description. It's a hoot. It's not like a regular dictionary. It's useful, but it's just filled with quotes and some of Johnson's own quirky definitions. So God bless everyone. Take care. I'm going to try to have one ready for Noah Webster here next month, and should have it ready within the next month. So take care. Bye bye.